Welcome back to the table. As always, I'm your host, Chad Tafs. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to Alpha Subs. As I've been preparing to get back into Army shape, I partnered with them as an ambassador. If you're working on your own fitness goals, you'll find my link and my discount code in the description. Now let's pull up a chair. Last week, we talked about the price of pride. How pride rarely shows itself for what it really is. It disguises itself as confidence, as stubbornness, as self-defense. We talked about how pride can cost us relationships, promotions, opportunities, and even our own personal growth. Because when we convince ourselves that we're always right, we stop listening, we stop learning, we stop becoming the men we're capable of being. We also talked about the power of humility, about owning our own mistakes, about saying 3 simple words, I was wrong. Because real strength isn't pretending you're perfect. Real strength is admitting when you're not. So this week we're going to take it one step further. Because sometimes the reason we never apologize, the reason we never ask for help, the reason we never tell someone how we really feel is because there's a conversation we've been avoiding. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. The conversations that we avoid. Whether it's because you're avoiding the conversation itself or because you're afraid of what might happen after you have it. That's what we're talking about today, the conversations that we avoid. So come on in, grab a drink, get comfortable, and pull up a chair. I think every one of us has had a conversation that we've had 100 times. Not with another person, but with ourselves. We rehearse it. We imagine every possible outcome. We predict what the other person is going to say. We practice our response, and then we change it. Then we practice it again, over and over and over. Sometimes we spend so much time preparing for the conversation that we never actually have it. We convince ourselves it's not the right time. I'll wait till tomorrow. They've got a lot going on. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to make them mad at me. I don't want to lose the relationship. Every excuse sounds reasonable until weeks turn into months, and then nothing changes. A few weeks ago, I found myself in exactly that situation. I had been waiting to have a conversation with someone. We had talked about it. It was supposed to happen. Monday came, nothing. Then another week passed, still nothing. Every single day, I found myself asking the same questions. Do I send another message? Am I being annoying? Am I going to damage the relationship if I keep reaching out? Maybe I should just wait one more day. I don't want to come across as pushy. I don't want to make things worse. I probably had that conversation in my head 50 to 60 times before I ever typed another message. And the crazy thing is, every version of that conversation ended differently in my mind. Sometimes they were understanding. Sometimes they were frustrated. Sometimes they ignored me. Sometimes everything worked out perfectly. The truth is, I had no idea how it would actually go. But my mind kept trying to convince me that it did. Maybe you've done the same thing. Maybe your conversation isn't about business. Maybe it's with your dad, with your wife, maybe your son, your daughter, your best friend. Maybe it's someone you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe it's the person you keep telling yourself you're going to call tomorrow. I think every one of us knows what it's like to replay a conversation again and again and again without ever having it. And the longer that we wait, the heavier it becomes. The words don't get easier to say. The conversation doesn't become less uncomfortable most of the time. It just becomes bigger in our minds. I've realized something though. Sometimes the hardest conversation isn't the one we have with someone else. It's the one we keep having with ourselves. Because until we stop arguing with ourselves, we'll never have the courage to finally have the conversation that needs to happen. I think if we're being real honest to ourselves, most of the conversations that we avoid have very little to do with the conversation itself. They have everything to do with fear. We come up with all kinds of reasons. It's not the right time. Oh, maybe they're busy. Oh, I'll wait till things settle down. Oh, I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to lose them. I don't want them to think differently about me. Those all sound like reasonable excuses. I've used some of them myself. Maybe you have too. But if we strip all of those reasons away, what's really underneath them? Fear. The fear of rejection. The fear that they'll say no. A fear that they'll get angry. A fear that they'll walk away. The fear that they'll never look at us the same again. A fear that we'll hear something we don't want to hear. And maybe the biggest fear of all, the fear of being vulnerable. Because vulnerability requires us to put ourselves out there without knowing how the other person is going to respond. And that's uncomfortable. Especially for men. I think a lot of us were raised believing that we're supposed to have it together. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to handle things on our own. We're supposed to fix problems, not create uncomfortable conversations. So instead of saying, I'm struggling, we keep it to ourselves. Instead of saying, I need help, we convince ourselves we'll figure it out. Instead of saying, I was wrong, we defend ourselves. Not because we're bad people, but because we're scared. And fear has a funny way of disguising itself as logic. It tells us, man, this isn't the right time. They've got enough on their plate. I don't want to stress them out. I'll bring it up after the holidays. I'll wait until next week. I'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow. That's one of fear's favorite words. Because tomorrow always feels easier than today. Until tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. And before you know it, you've spent a year avoiding a conversation that probably would have taken 10 minutes. I've done that. I've built up conversations in my mind so much that by the time I finally had them, I wondered why I waited so long. Were they uncomfortable? 100%. Were they as bad as I imagined? Almost not. Never. Because our minds are really good at creating worst case scenarios. We imagine every possible outcome. We picture every argument, every awkward silence, every negative reaction. We spend so much time imagining failure that we never give success a chance. Sometimes the conversation goes far better than we expected. Sometimes the other person has been waiting for us to say something too. Sometimes they're just as nervous as we are, but we'll never know if we never speak. So here's a question that I've had to ask myself. When I'm avoiding a difficult conversation, who am I really protecting? Am I protecting the other person, or am I protecting myself from being uncomfortable? Because those are two completely different things. Sometimes we tell ourselves we're keeping the peace, but what we're really doing is avoiding temporary discomfort. The problem is temporary discomfort often becomes permanent distance. The conversation doesn't disappear. It just gets heavier. Every day you carry it with you. You think about it when you're driving, while you're laying in bed, while you're at work. It quietly follows you everywhere you go until one day you finally realize the conversation wasn't the heaviest part. Carrying it around was. So let me ask you something. What has fear been convincing you not to say? Who have you been meaning to call? Who have you been meaning to apologize to? Who have you been meaning to check on? And if fear wasn't part of the equation, would you still be waiting? Because maybe the conversation that you're afraid to have is a very conversation that has the power to change your life. One thing that I've realized over the years is that doing nothing is still doing something. We like to think that if we stay quiet, if we don't bring it up, if we don't make the phone call, if we don't send the text, then nothing really changes. But that's not true. Silence makes a decision. Silence communicates something, even when you don't mean for it to. Think about your marriage. Maybe you've been carrying around stress for months. Maybe you're worried about money. Maybe you're struggling mentally. Maybe you've been feeling disconnected. But instead of sitting down and saying, hey, can we talk? You keep it to yourself. Maybe you're trying to protect your spouse. Maybe you don't want to burden them. Maybe you'll think it'll pass. But while you're staying silent, your spouse may be wondering if they've done something wrong. They may think you're angry. They may think you've stopped caring. Not because that's true, but because silence leaves room for assumptions. Now think about your friends. How many times have you thought, man, I should check on him? I haven't talked to him in a while. I wonder how he's doing. Then life got busy. Work happened. Kids happened. Another week went by. Then another month. Then before you know it, a year's passed. Not because either one of you stopped caring, but because both of you assumed the other one would reach out first. Sometimes friendships don't end because of betrayal. Sometimes they simply fade because of silence. Now think about your parents, if you're fortunate to still have one, like I am. Have you ever thought, I'll ask them about that another time. I'll ask about what their childhood was like. I'll ask about my grandparents. I'll ask how they met. I'll ask them what they remember about me growing up. Then another holiday comes, another birthday, another year, and somehow you still haven't asked. The truth is, none of us know how many opportunities we have left. One day, those stories disappear. Not because they weren't worth telling, but because we waited so long to ask. Now think about your kids. Sometimes we avoid difficult conversations because we don't want another argument. Sometimes we avoid correcting them because we're tired. Sometimes we avoid encouraging them because we assume they already know how proud we are. But do they? Like, do they really? Have they actually heard the words? Have they heard you say, I'm proud of you, I love you, I believe in you, or I'll always be here? Never assume the people you love already know what your heart is trying to say. Tell them. They need to hear it. Even at work, silence can cost us. Maybe you've never asked your boss, wait, what can I improve? Not because you don't want to get better, but because you're afraid of hearing the answer. Maybe you've never spoken up about an idea. Maybe you've never asked for a promotion. Maybe you've never admitted you needed help yourself. And because you stayed silent, the opportunity passed you by. Silence feels safe for a little while. But safety and growth rarely live in the same place. And here's what I've learned. Every conversation you avoid is still changing your life. You just don't notice it immediately. Every day you stay silent, the relationship changes a little. The distance grows a little. The opportunity gets a little further away. The words become a little harder to say. And eventually, what could have been one honest conversation turns into years of wondering, what if I would have just said something? I don't want to live a life full of what ifs. I don't want to look back and realize that I let fear make decisions that should have been made with honesty. Because sometimes, the loudest thing you'll ever say is nothing at all. And sometimes, the conversations we never have end up speaking louder than the ones we do. One thing life has taught me is that time doesn't automatically fix everything. I think a lot of us believe it does. We tell ourselves, man, I'll just give it some time. Things will work themselves out. They just need some space. I just need some space. Eventually we'll talk. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes time does help. Sometimes emotions settle down. Sometimes people just need room to breathe. But there are also times when waiting doesn't heal the situation. It quietly makes it worse. Because while we're waiting, life keeps moving. Friendships fade. Not because of one huge fight, but because neither person reached out. One day you realize the last conversation you had with that friend was 2 years ago. Not because you stopped caring, not because they stopped caring, but you both just got busy. And silence slowly becomes distance. Marriages drift apart the same way. People don't usually wake up one morning and suddenly become strangers. It happens one conversation at a time, one ignored feeling, one unresolved argument, one difficult discussion that gets pushed to tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next week becomes next month. And before long, you're sharing a house, but you're no longer sharing your life. Then there's our parents. And this one hits me every time I think about it. Our parents aren't getting younger, and neither are we. Every year that passes is another year that we won't get back. Maybe there's a question you always wanted to ask. Maybe you always wanted to know what your mom's childhood was like. Maybe you wanted to ask your dad why he made certain decisions. Maybe you wanted to thank them. Maybe you wanted to forgive them. Maybe you wanted to tell them how much they meant to you. But we keep telling ourselves, there will always be another chance. I hope there is, I really do. But none of us are promised another conversation. Our kids grow up too. One day they're asking you to read them a bedtime story. The next they're asking to borrow the car. Then they're packing for college. Then they're starting families of their own. If you've been waiting to tell your son you're proud of them, or your daughter how much she means to you, don't assume they'll always know. Tell them, because those conversations matter. Waiting doesn't just affect relationships, it also affects opportunities. Maybe you've wanted to apply for that promotion, start that business, go back to school, apply for that one job, ask for someone to mentor you, but fear convinced you to wait until you felt ready. Here's what I've learned. Most people never feel completely ready. Sometimes the opportunity disappears. Not because you weren't capable, but because you waited too long to take that first step. And when all of those missed conversations, missed opportunities, and missed moments begin to add up, they turn into something even heavier. Regret. And I think regret is one of the hardest things a person can carry. Not because of something you tried and failed at, but because of something you never did. Man, I should have called. I should have apologized. I should have asked. I should have said I love you. I should have forgiven them. I should have had that conversation. Those words can stay with a person for years, and sometimes for the rest of your life. That's why I don't think time is the answer. Action is. Sometimes the conversation we avoid today becomes tomorrow's greatest regret. So let me ask you something. If today was the last opportunity you had, what would you regret never saying? Who would you call? Who would you forgive? Who would you thank? Who would you apologize to? Because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Another chance isn't guaranteed. But today is. And maybe the conversation you've been putting off is the one you'll be most thankful you finally had. It's time for a roundtable reflection. Before we move on, I want you to take a moment. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. If you're sitting at home, maybe set your phone down for just a minute, because I don't want you to answer these questions out loud. I want you to answer them honestly. As you've been listening today, did somebody come to your mind? Maybe you know exactly who it was the moment this episode started. Maybe you've been thinking about them the entire time. Who was it? Why them? What conversations have you been replaying over and over without ever having it? Maybe it's an apology. Maybe it's a thank you. Maybe it's an I love you. Maybe it's an I forgive you. Maybe it's finally asking for help. Or maybe it's just simply picking up the phone. Now imagine something with me. Imagine your phone rang right now, and it was them. Would you answer? Or would you let it ring, telling yourself, man, I'll call back later? If they texted you, would you respond? Or would you wait until tomorrow? And here's the question I really want you to think about. If nothing changes, if you keep waiting, if you keep putting the conversation off, where will this relationship be a year from now? Will it be better? Will it be the same? Or will it be further apart? Sometimes we spend so much time waiting for the perfect moment that we completely miss the moments that we're already given. Let's keep talking. One thing I've realized is that we've spent far too much time waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect timing, the perfect words, the perfect amount of confidence. We tell ourselves, man, when I'm ready, I'll have that conversation. When I know exactly what to say, I'll make the phone call. When I feel more confident, I'll apologize. But here's what life has taught me. Most of us never feel completely ready. If you've ever stood in front of a pool, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can stand there all day. You can tell yourself the water is probably cold. You can convince yourself to wait another minute. You can watch everyone else jump in. But eventually, the only way to find out is to jump. I think difficult conversations work the same way. We keep waiting for confidence to arrive. The funny thing is, confidence usually comes after the conversation, not before it. It comes after you realize, man, that wasn't nearly as bad as I imagined. It comes after you finally say the words you've been carrying around for weeks, months, maybe even years. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the conversation. It's the first sentence. I need help. I love you. I miss you. I'm sorry. I forgive you. I was wrong. I'm struggling. Think about how simple those sentences are. Most of them are only 2 or 3 words. Yet they can be some of the hardest words a man will ever say. Not because they're complicated, but because they're honest. Honesty requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels risky, especially when you don't know how the other person is going to respond. Maybe they'll forgive you. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll say exactly what you were hoping to hear. Maybe they'll surprise you. The truth is, You can't control their response. You can only control your courage. I think that's something we forget. We spend so much time trying to control the outcome that we never take responsibility for the action. Your responsibility isn't making someone forgive you. Your responsibility is offering the apology. Your responsibility isn't making someone love you back. It's being honest enough to tell them how you feel. Your responsibility isn't controlling the conversation. It's having it. I've also learned that honesty has a way of creating freedom, even when the conversation doesn't go the way you hoped. Because at least you know. At least you said what needed to be said. At least you won't spend the next 10 years wondering, what if? Man, those two words, what if, can be incredibly heavy. What if I would have called? What if I would have apologized? What if I would have told them that I love them? Don't spend your life collecting what ifs. Collect moments where you had the courage to speak. Because courage isn't having difficult conversations without fear. Courage is having them, despite the fear. And most of the time, you'll discover that the conversation you were dreading was never as frightening as the silence you carried before it. Before we wrap up today's conversation, it's time for this week's challenge. And this week, I'm going to keep it simple. I don't want you to make a list of 10 things you need to change. I don't want you to overwhelm yourself. I want you to have one conversation. One. That's it. Maybe it's one phone call, one text message, one apology, one invitation to sit down and talk. Maybe it's finally asking someone for help. Maybe it's telling someone I love you. Maybe it's telling someone I've been struggling. Whatever it is, don't wait until you feel ready. Because you may never feel ready. Don't wait until next week. Don't wait until life slows down. Don't wait until timing feels perfect. Because perfect timing rarely exists. Take the first step. You don't have to know exactly how the conversation is going to end. You just have to be willing to begin it. And if your hands shake, that's okay. If your voice cracks, that's okay. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. Growth usually begins on the other side of uncomfortable conversations. So this week, choose courage over comfort. Have that conversation, then see what happens. You might be surprised by what one honest conversation can have. As we close today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Every relationship you have exists because of conversation. Some conversations started those relationships. Some strengthened them. Some healed them. Some broke them. Some ended them. But none of them happened without somebody choosing to speak. Words have a way of changing lives. Sometimes they create distance. Sometimes they bring people back together. Sometimes they become the beginning of forgiveness. Sometimes they become the beginning of healing. That's why conversations we avoid matter so much. Because silence writes a story too. And if we're not careful, fear becomes the author. Don't let fear write the next chapter of your life. If there's something that needs to be said, say it. If there's someone who needs to hear from you, call them. If there's forgiveness that needs to be offered, offer it. If there's gratitude you never expressed, express it. If there's love you've assumed people already know, tell them anyway. Because tomorrow isn't promised. And some conversations are too important to keep waiting for. Thanks for pulling up a chair with me today. If this conversation meant something to you, I'd appreciate if you follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. And if you know another man who needs to hear the conversation, share it with them. Because sometimes one honest conversation can change a life. Thanks a lot for pulling up a chair. I'll see you next time at the Roundtable for Men.